All right, hi everybody. Hopefully you're all doing great out there. Thanks for watching. In this video, I'll continue my discussion of Thomson's paper, The Trolley Problem, and we're really on to Thomson's attempt to solve the trolley problem. We've seen her consider several possible solutions, and then in her paper argue that those solutions fail. So there's the trolley problem, and then there's Thomson using trolley cases themselves to show that attempted solutions to the trolley problem fail. Okay, so we know that when Thomson's considering the trolley problem in the second half of the paper, roughly, she's considering the bystander case, or what she calls a bystander to the switch case, and the transplant case. And she wants to know what the moral difference is between those cases. So that's another way of formulating the trolley problem. So as I briefly mentioned last time, and as you've likely seen from reading the Thomson, supposing you have, um, Thomson's solution to the trolley problem rests on the concept of a right. So when we think about the killing versus letting die distinction, that doesn't like explicitly invoke a notion of rights, although there might be a notion of rights in the background, or intimately connected to the killing versus letting die distinction. And then we've thought about the formula of humanity, the Kantian solution. And that doesn't, at least directly or explicitly, involve the concept of a right. Though I think once again, one could connect the concept of right to it. And then utilitarianism, in as much as put that on the table as a possible way of solving the trolley problem, though Thomson's not considering that as one of the possible solutions, doesn't invoke the concept of rights, because in a way the utilitarian view is that rights are secondary or derivative in their moral framework. So this helps us understand utilitarianism a bit better. So I wanted to introduce utilitarianism as a framework for thinking about moral problems, because that's one of the common ways that philosophers attempt to deal with moral problems. And so when we get to this idea of thinking about rights, well, a utilitarian can claim that there are rights, but the rights are always going to be derived from um, the central principle that they claim holds in an absolute manner in their moral framework, which is the principle of promoting the happiness of all. So if we just, for simplicity's sake, run with the slogan of utilitarianism as the principle that we're to promote the happiness of all when we act, the right action that we're to perform in every circumstance is the one that will promote the happiness of all. And that's the only principle. Well, then that doesn't invoke anything like rights. So typically utilitarians will say, yeah, rights feature in our moral system, but they all derive from the fact that they tend to promote the happiness of all. So the concept of rights, or the theory of rights developed in a utilitarian framework, is derivative on the happiness that having rights would produce, which means that when there's a conflict between rights on the one hand and happiness on the other, according to utilitarian, well, happiness prevails. And other non-utilitarian views, like the Kantian view as at least one way of developing it, and other rights-based views, want to say something like no, there's at least a range of cases, if not many cases, where, or most cases, it just might depend on the way the theory gets worked out, where the where there's a conflict between rights and happiness, rights prevail. Okay, um, so this is abstract, so maybe a couple examples would help, or let's just maybe just work with one. So suppose you could um, you know, by killing an innocent person, you could bring about, on balance, more happiness in the world. Okay, so you would thereby be promoting the happiness of all by killing some innocent person. Um, the utilitarian, all things being equal, would say, oh, this person's right not to be killed um, um, is to be violated um, in favor of promoting the happiness of all. And many non-utilitarians think that that's extremely counterintuitive, that you can't just kill an innocent person in order to bring about more happiness in the world. Um, it might be the case that like if killing one innocent person led to, um, you know, overwhelmingly significant um, uh, improvements in happiness levels, then maybe we reconsider. But it's not certainly simple cost benefit analysis or you know um, unhappiness happiness calculation where we go, okay, well, on balance there's going to be a little bit more uh, happiness that would result if we killed this one innocent person. So hopefully that example helps out, the example of killing an innocent person where a utilitarian is again, all things being equal, committed to um, claiming that where killing an innocent person would bring about more happiness, that killing the person violating their right to life, the right not to be killed, is to be violated. Whereas many non-utilitarians disagree and say, no, it's the right that has priority, moral priority in the case. You can't just kill an innocent person, even if it brings about more happiness. More would have to be said, more would have to be provided in order to um, justify violating someone's right to life or the right not to be killed. I'm supposing here that the right to life entails having the right not to be killed. Okay. Um, so that's the way of thinking about rights. And so Thomson, she's putting herself, in the anti-utilitarian rights-based tradition here, and she's claiming that the solution to the trolley problem is going to involve thinking, explicitly about this concept of a right. And I've tried to, I developed the example. I'm trying, just a moment ago, I'm trying to give you a sense of what a right is. It's a claim that someone has to something, um, which might not be initially too helpful in thinking about it, but we tend to think that we have um, natural rights and um, political rights. And the natural rights are the rights that we would have even if we didn't belong to a political society, even if we were, say, stateless. These would be the kinds of rights that we'd have in a state of nature. Sometimes it's said, following ideas of those who are in the natural law tradition of ethics, like philosophers Hobbes and Locke and others. So um, so these are claims to things that people have, and there's typically, if not always, a corresponding duty that someone has in relation to the right that someone has, the claim that someone has. So if I have the right to life, let's say I have that right to say I have the right to life in a state of nature, then people have a duty not to interfere with my right to life. They have a duty not to kill me. That's a stringent negative right. When you think about how the right not to be killed, that's a negative, duty that I have. I might also have like the right to self-preservation, and other people then have an obligation or a duty not to interfere with my right to self-preserve. Okay, so sometimes thinking about the connection between rights and duties helps illuminate this idea of having a right. Of course, there's political, duties. You might think that that having the right to free speech is something that we don't have in our natural state, but in a state of nature. But we might have, we think we have it right. I think you only have it in a political society. And so in that case, it's the belonging to a political community which um, provides the right and the corresponding duties, the right not to be interfered with as I attempt to express myself. Um, so long as the person I'm trying to speak to is a willing listener, etc. Okay, we'll talk more about the right to free speech later in the course, and it may come up in between now and then, but still. Um, so just trying to give you a sense of rights. There's more that could be said. Um, I've talked about a stringent negative duty, but think about, the contrast idea just very briefly, the concept of a positive right. The paradigmatic case would be, think about in our natural state, think about how children have the right to be fed, the right to be benefited by their parents, and those seem to be positive duties. Okay, so having the right to be cared for by one's parents in a natural state um, is a positive is a positive right that's had, and the corresponding duty is going to be a positive one. So it's not just not interfering with the baby, but actually providing the baby with the relevant benefits. Okay, and we can talk more about this. Just let me know. I just want to point to a couple of places where Thomson's solution starts to get developed, so you can find it in the text in case you are struggling to do so. So really here's being in section 5. Let's start with the second paragraph that carries over to page 1404. She notes, as is plain that my hypothesis as to the source of the moral difference between the cases, between the bystander case and the transplant case, makes appeal to the concept of a right. My own feeling, my own thinking, is that solving this problem requires making an appeal to that concept or to some other concept that does the same kind of work. Okay, so she's fine saying that there might be some other concept that can do the work here, but for her, it's going to be rights. And which is, I think it is one of the main reasons why this trolley problem is of such interest to moral theory, moral philosophy, ethics, that it does force us to appeal to that concept, to the concept of rights. And by the same token, we learn something from it about that concept. We learn something from it about that concept. And she mentions this philosopher named Ronald Dworkin, who is a rights-based theorist, and he gives us this slogan, a helpful slogan, rights trump utilities. And that's in line with thinking about those who would say in the non-utilitarian way that you can't just kill an innocent person, violating their right to life and right not to be killed, if that even if that results in bringing about, on balance, more happiness in the world, right? Because the idea of rights trumps or morally outweighs utilities, where utilities are understood as good outcomes, happiness outcomes, or some such. So that is, if one would infringe a right in or by acting, think about the case of killing an innocent person, then it is not sufficient justification for acting that one would thereby maximize utility. It wouldn't be sufficient in that case, all things being equal, to maintain, oh, we can bring about more happiness. Okay. Um, so then killing an innocent person wouldn't be justified, morally speaking. So it seems to me like that something like this must be correct. So this is where Thomson's, you're throwing your hat in the non-utilitarian ring, which you already could have gathered, but she's emphasizing rights. Okay. And then, as I said, 1409, I believe. So here, top of page 1409, section 7, she says more precisely, it is not morally required of us that we let a burden descend out of the blue onto 5 when we can make it instead descend onto 1. And then here's the important condition, the important if, an important 2-letter word, we can make it descend onto the 1 by means which do not themselves constitute infringements of rights of the 1. Okay, so it's a complicated way she writes the sentence. It's grammatically fine. It's just a complicated way of putting her point here. She's saying here that when we face a situation like the bystander case, okay, we don't have to sit idly by and allow the burden to fall on, or the danger to descend upon the 5, right? If we can redirect the danger or redirect the burden toward the 1 by means that don't constitute an infringement on the 1's rights. So the means that we would take to redirect danger from the many, the 5, to the few, to the 1, is permissible, or can be permissible in some cases, so long as, right, or if, as she puts it here, so long as is probably too strong. If, okay, so sufficient condition, not an only if condition, so it's not a necessary condition, but it's a sufficient one, right? If by redirecting the danger or the burden, as Thomson expresses here, we're not thereby violating the 1's or the few's rights. Okay, not that there's no rights violation to the few or to the 1. It's just that the means taken, excuse me, to redirect the burden or the danger itself doesn't constitute a rights violation. Okay, and we'll get clear on that when we consider what Thomson and others call the fat man case. Back to the slides here. You get a flavor of it there, but let's see if we can understand it a bit more, because I know it is a bit heady. So the bystander case, so danger is directed toward the 5. We know that. And the bystander can direct the danger towards the 1. That'd be acceptable. Okay. And we know he can direct the danger towards the 1 because he has a switch available. He can flip the switch directing the danger toward the 1 instead of 5. Crucially for Thomson, the bystander, can direct the danger towards the 1 by means that themselves do not constitute an infringement on the 1's rights. Okay, so that's the bystander case. So we're applying this notion of rights in the relevant way to, the bystander case, and then we go to the transplant case. So we're urgent to redirect danger to the healthy patient in order to free dying patients of danger. Okay, so the dying patients, remember the danger there, going through as well the natural, the dangers of the natural lottery where their organs are failing. You're supposed to consider the dying patients as being victims of a natural lottery or some such, not as being responsible for their conditions. I don't think I made that clear last time, but that might be helpful in thinking about the case, though you probably already had something like that in mind, given how we made similar qualifications when we developed the original trolley case, or what Thomson calls the trolley driver case. Okay, so we're urgent to redirect danger to the healthy patient in order to free dying patients of danger. He would have to do so, wouldn't he, through means themselves that constitute an infringement of the rights of the healthy patients. Okay, so here I'm trying to use Thomson's language a little bit, so you can get used to it. It's perfectly grammatical sentence. It's just you're not used to sentences. I wasn't used to such sentences, but when you read them through, they're grammatically fine. Um, so we know what the um, the rights infringement would be. In this case, it would be, well, um, forcing uh, the healthy patient to sacrifice his organs by having those organs harvested against his will. Okay, the bystander case. So let's go back to that one. So why does Thomson think that the means taken in that case to killing the one, sacrificing the one to save the five, wouldn't itself constitute a rights violation? Well, because all bystander needs to do is flip the switch or direct the trolley towards the one. Okay. So that's all, away from the five. And in doing this all by itself, Thomson argues, does not constitute infringement on the rights of the one. It doesn't. So the means itself doesn't. Okay. And the transplant case, we've already suggested what the means, suggested how the means taken would itself constitute a rights violation, or would themselves constitute a rights violation. Well, surgeon would need to operate on an unwilling patient. Okay. Operate on an unwilling patient, yeah, in dramatic fashion as well. So that means that surgeon needs to the means that surgeon needs to take to redirect danger from the dying patient to the healthy patient do constitute an infringement on healthy patient's rights. And that's different from the transplant case, or different from the bystander case. Okay. So redirecting a trolley toward the one versus operating on an unwilling patient. And now Thomson, she wants to, in a way, provide some support for her position by considering a different case, a different trolley case. I call it the footbridge case. You want to call it the fat man case, that's fine. A recent workout on a recent book by a philosopher named David Edmonds. Highly recommended if you're interested in this topic. It's called Would You Kill the Fat Man? I have it on my bookshelf behind me, but nice read, and you get a lot of ethics, a lot of history of ethics, and a lot of philosophy in that book. So if it interests you, let me know if you want to chat about it. But the fat man case here. So consider a case which I call fat man, in which you are standing on a footbridge over the trolley track. You can see a trolley hurtling down the track out of control. You turn around to see where the trolley's headed, and there are 5 workmen on the track where it exits from, under the footbridge. So yeah, we're on page 14, top of page 1409 again. Just the second full paragraph there. What to do? Being an expert on trolleys, being a trolleyologist as you are, you know of one certain way to stop an out of control trolley drop a really heavy weight in its path. But where to find one? Just so happens that standing next to you on the footbridge is a fat man, a really fat man. He's leaning over the railing, watching the trolley. All you have to do is give him a little shove, and over the railing he will go onto the track in the path, onto the track in the path of the trolley. Okay, would it be permissible for you to do this? And then Thomson says, everybody to whom I have put this case says it would not be. But why? Okay, well, it's going to be the same kind of reasoning. The means taken to redirect danger away from the 5 to the 1 constitutes itself a rights infringement. What's the means taken in this case? Pushing a fat man, pushing a person off of a footbridge. Okay, so here's just an image, one way of capturing it. The original case involves the pushing of a fat man off of a footbridge like this. In case you're wondering what a footbridge looks like, and sometimes the case is set up to where the fat man, whom I often call portly fella, as I've already mentioned, is leaning forward. So we have to just give him a slight push, and down he goes, and he'll be able to stop the trolley and thus save the five track workers who are there. Okay. All innocent parties here. Of course, if you're like Thomson and others, but in this case, you think that, well, you're not, or the person who pushes is not innocent, but don't want to beg the question in the description of the case. Some don't like the pushing aspect of it. I think that might taint our intuitions or our strong judgments when we think about the case. So they invent a case where it's bystander again, who's there he is, and he has a switch available, and he could knock the portly fella, fat man, off of the footbridge to stop the trolley. But obviously, he's getting pushed to his certain death in order to save the five. So the footbridge case, the means required in this case to direct danger towards the portly fella and thus away from the five track workers constitutes an infringement on portly fella's rights. And then, so this explains the difference between bystander and footbridge. Okay. So in a way, you could have set the case, and actually, 2008 Thomson recognizes that we could set up the trolley problem by thinking about bystander and footbridge, or even original trolley and footbridge. Okay, what's the difference between those cases? Well, this seems to be a very serviceable theory, anyways. Okay, so hopefully we're clear on this idea of the means taken to perform some action. We tend to think, don't we, that that when we want to do something, or we want some outcome to result, there are means that we have to take to achieve those outcomes. So the focus here is on the means that someone has to take. And very often, the means taken to some outcome involves acting in some way, right? Performing an action. Okay. Okay, sometimes we have to, sometimes the means taken themselves are an action, but they're the means to yet another action. So, flipping the switch, right? I do that in order to um, turn on the water, which then allows me to water the yard or some such. Okay, so you might be asking at this point, okay, Thomson's focusing on the means taken, and perhaps this was tricky toward the end of the paper. Doesn't the one-track worker and bystander have his right to life violated, though? Just like, the healthy patient in transplant does. So Thomson says, yeah, it does. It's just that the means to directing the burden, danger, catastrophe, as I note here, away from the five doesn't itself constitute infringement or a violation of the one-track worker's rights. Okay, so Thomson's not saying that the one in the bystander case, the one-track worker who can permissibly be sacrificed to save the five, Thomson claims. It doesn't say that their rights aren't violated. No, there's a serious rights violation there. It's just that flipping a switch or redirecting a trolley toward the one itself doesn't constitute a rights violation. So even in the original trolley case, in that case, there's a sacrificing of rights. But yeah, of course, the one-track workers' rights, right to life, right not to be killed, and all the rest has been violated. Okay. But you might say in that case, what Thomson might say in that case is, right, the means taken, flipping the switch to send the trolley to the one-track worker itself doesn't constitute a rights violation. So big picture, if we sort of zoom out here, the original trolley gives us reason to think that morality, ethics, permits us in some cases, emphasis on some cases, to redirect a burden of danger or catastrophe away from the many towards the few. That's why the trolley problem has an applied ethics flavor. Um, you know, you might see how this kind of um, discussion could apply to things like programming autonomous vehicles, right? What do we do in cases in cases like where um, we could kill um, one person versus five people when those are our only options available while we're driving an autonomous vehicle, right? How do we program a car, as it were, to decide those things? Um, but that'd just be a way of thinking about the ethics of redirecting danger from the many to the few, as I like to put it. Okay. Morality seems to suggest that at least sometimes it's okay. Um, the correct explanation, see if I can make this a little bit bigger. I know it's a lot of words on this slide. Yeah. So the correct explanation involves thinking about rights as we know. So we're just zooming out here a little bit and summarizing. So it involves thinking about rights, what morally permits redirecting burdens, dangers, and catastrophes away from the many towards the few, in the cases where such redirections are morally permissible, is grounded in sufficiently explained by the means taken in such redirections. If the means to such directions involve no constitutive rights violations to the few towards whom the burdens, dangers, catastrophes are directed, then such redirections can be morally permissible. Okay, so this just reemphasizes the points that have already been made as we just think about this issue in a big picture kind of way. Now later, Thomson, when we think about um, the original trolley or the trolley driver case, the bystander case, Thomson wants to revisit, in part because she mentions a PhD student. This is roughly 2008. So the paper was published in 2008, but the conversation she had with this PhD student may have been as early as 2006 and 7, as far as I know. And anyways, uh, uh, what Thomson learned or developed in response to these conversations was thinking about how uh, her thinking that killing the one in the original trolley and the one in bystander case may have been mistaken. At least her arguments for those claims seem like they could have been resting on a mistake for 85 piece that we're studying may have some issues with it. And the way she thinks about it is by having us imagine, let's take the original trolley case, or what she calls the trolley driver case. Imagine a third option being that you could flip a switch that would direct you into a brick wall that would end up killing you if you're the trolley driver. So the person who is driving the trolley would have that option. Okay, so you have the options now being three: kill the one to save the five, kill yourself to save the five, um, and well, kill the five. And if you think about these three options and you think about, well, in your own case, you wouldn't want to get killed in order to save the five. Well, she thinks that if we're thinking about things carefully, morally, then that seems to count against killing the one to save the five, because what makes us so special, right, in our own case. Likewise, in the bystander case, um, maybe bystander could do something that would involve killing himself instead of killing the one, which would allow him to save the five instead. Um, so perhaps you could redirect the trolley to run into him, or you make the bystander in that case portly fellow, or who's called fat man, and the bystander has to throw himself onto the track. Of course, he doesn't want to do that. You think, he wouldn't think that that's his. Uh, he'd have strong reason for not wanting to kill himself in order to save the five. But then, so would the one have strong reason, okay? And not just like in a subjective sense, but it seems like objectively. And so Thomson, backs off of this idea that that uh, um, that she develops in the early part of her paper, where she says, "Oh, Foote's response to the trolley problem is wrong because of the bystander switch case." She's like, "Well, perhaps I'm wrong, and perhaps the killing versus letting die distinction actually turns out to be quite significant." Um, so, anyways, that's just to catch up to speed with the later Thomson and thinking about this issue. I didn't have you read that, but if you're interested, let me know. That's just to go a bit beyond, especially for those of you who are interested in this topic. So if you're interested in looking at Thomson's 2008 paper, reach out to me and I'll help you out with that. But I think this is like the last slide here. So hopefully you've learned the general structure of Thomson's paper. You've learned several trolley cases in trolleyology. You know what the trolley problem is itself, at least in a couple of different ways, but it's formulated in the text. Okay. You learned some theory along the way. You learned how this is a quasi-applied ethical topic. But the aim and the goal here is to teach you some ethical theory and how it connects to thinking about something, again, quasi-applied, as we segue to dealing with straightforwardly applied issues, and where some of the theoretical stuff that we talked about, some of the theories that we've talked about, for example, will come up again in the course, as philosophers often use principles or theories to guide them in thinking about what to do about world poverty. That's going to be coming up soon. So, and that's just one example. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing here and wish you all well. Thanks for watching. Feel free to be in touch with any questions that you have. I'm happy to answer them. And I'll see you all next time. Take care.